Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session entitled Urban Labs in Turbulent Times, the stories from Beirut and São Paulo. So we are just going to give a couple of minutes for more people to join us. We had a very big list of people interested in the event because we are operating in different time zones. I could just ask for a couple of minutes, literally 2 minutes, for us to get more people in the room. And then we're going to be recording the event, and we'll be sharing the recording with all the people that have signed up. So just give us 2 more minutes, and then we will be able to start. So welcome, everyone. We're going to start our recording now. Abby, please, and then I will start our introductions.
The recording's on and ready to go.
Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you all. We have the great privilege to be today joined by Mona Fawaz and Raquel Rolnik. You know, these are 2 amazing women that we are all inspired by and that we look up to them, and particularly the work in their 2 urban laboratories is of particular attention, and we see and follow with great interest. So today's event is entitled Urban Labs in Turbulent Times, Stories from Beirut and São Paulo. My name is Catalina Ortiz. I'm the director of UCL Urban Lab, and as part of the series of events that we are hosting in 2025, we've been discussing several questions around the role of urban labs. We've been going back and forth, trying to touch upon different key topics, particularly related to what are the urgent urban questions that we should be addressing, and therefore what is kind of the ethos where we are actually, grounding our work. And I couldn't think of anyone better to actually help us to think about the role of urban labs in these turbulent times than Raquel Rolnik and Mona Fawaz. They both don't need a bigger introduction, but I will just say a few words for the ones that are not very familiar with them. So Mona Fawaz is professor in urban studies and planning at the American University of Beirut, where she co-founded and co-directs the Beirut Urban Lab, a regional research center invested in working towards more inclusive, just, and viable cities. Mona's research has advanced urbanization through the lenses of informality and the law, land, housing, property, and space, always responding to the urge of informing planning theory and practice. She publishes her work in both academic and public venues, and she's keen on working on activists, public actors, and other researchers to advance the causes of urban justice. Raquel Rolnik is professor of urban planning at the University of São Paulo and a leading voice on housing rights and urban policy in Brazil. A former UN Special Rapporteur on adequate housing, she has also served in national and municipal government roles. She currently heads the LabCidade, a research lab monitoring evictions and urban inequality. She's the author of the highly acclaimed book Urban Warfare, published in 2018 by Verso and other presses. And she is a lead scholar in Southern urbanism. So I'm very happy to join you both. We are going to structure this conversation first. Raquel is going to present part of the work in the lab, then Mona Fawaz is going to be following the same pattern. Then I will be opening up for some questions and answers, and we will have the chance to get some of your input. We aim to spend an hour and a half, and so hopefully we will get to hear and respond all your questions. So without further ado, thank you, Raquel, for joining us from São Paulo. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Catalina Ortiz and all the UCL Urban Laboratory. And I think the question that was raised for us today is, what is our place, our role as urban research lab in those turbulent times? And it's a privilege here to share this, I don't know if it's afternoon or morning or anything, with Mona Fawaz and the experience of Beirut Urban Lab. I think that our main challenge here is to look for and enforce methodologies of theory and research that confront the dominant epistemologies that undergird the production and transformation of space under the conditions of financial, and I would add racial capitalism. So I think taking production of space as a conflictive realm. So we are talking about conflict over space, and we are talking about the political economy of housing and cities. So we have to seek and understand the structural mechanisms of dispossession, that market-driven displacement in the age of neoliberalization is leading us, with a very clear state-organized violence, state-led processes of dispossession and taking over what I called in my book the colonization of urban space and housing by finance. And of course, in order to do that, there is a methodological challenge, and I will try to share the experience of LabCidade with my colleagues of LabCidade on some of the things that we have tried to do up to now in order to present a very short, I would say, example of what could be done, what should be done. So let me get here. Can you see?
Yes.
It's okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. So I will bring you some examples of our practice in LabCidade in order to open up for our sharing discussion. LabCidade is a laboratory based on the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning, which does critical research on contemporary urban and housing systems, which has been restructured under finance in these times, including public policies, reading critically public policies, but also it's a laboratory that aims to intervene in the public debate on the making of those policies and decisions. Our main focus is the metropolitan region of São Paulo, Brazil, but also other regions in Brazil, Latin America, but also the globe, which we position ourselves as a laboratory located at the periphery of capitalism, which has a lot to say about the center of capitalism as well. And in order to do that, we have a website, and we assemble research results, even if the research projects are not completely complete. But as soon as we have research results, we publicize those in order to share with the people who are being affected by changes in the city, in order for them to use this information in their struggles, in their fights, in the public discussions on the city. And our material is taken by the media. We do media ourselves with our websites, with our social networks, but also we participate in debates in the big media, also on the topics, mobilizing this knowledge, mobilizing this type of research products. But also we do action research with networks of partners in different scales. That includes, but not only, participatory local counter plans. There is a U missing here in the text, sorry. Counter planning in terms of, in situations of conflict that communities are affected by plans which are affecting perversely their lives and are not taking into account their needs. We think together with communities to design counter planning in these conflictual planning arenas. But also, this is one of the ways, one of the means of working. But also, we do other actions like sharing and discussing. I'm going to give one example, because in LabCidade we have the Evictions Observatory, which is a project that is going on for more than 10 years now. It's almost 13 years that we do have and are perfectioning it. But this is one of our projects. But I pick it because I think it's maybe the best example of how can you be a very, very serious in terms of academics research lab, and at the same time an actor in the discussion of policies and urban restriction. So the Evictions Observatory, this is one of the examples of a map that we do constantly, map of evicted households, but also the ones that are under threat of eviction. And we cross them with other lines of research of our laboratory, which are urban renewal plans, thinking on them, public-private partnerships that are launched as well, rezoning, urban renewal projects that are part of this game. And then we cross this information in order to do two things. First, to create a narrative on the changes that are going on, but also to assemble experiences that are lived by the communities themselves as particular, as only my community, as something that is affected them, in order to create a network of different affected communities that are affected by the same process or by the same project. So this is one type of things that we are doing. The data that we are relying comes from claims received from a cell phone through WhatsApp channel, also a clipping of the press, taking all the information about eventually a community or somebody that will be dispossessed, evicted. Also field research, information obtained by the communities, public data eventually that is published, that we can try and imagine that because of that, crossing and mobilizing a lot cartography. So this is one of the things and methods. We use cartographical methodologies not to represent processes, but in order to understand processes, crossing different means of doing cartography in order to see. And then all the data are georeferenced, and all the data that is georeferenced, we open this data also for the community. Then with this information in our hands, we have then information about how many evictions are going to, the interest here is not to talk about that, but to show the way we show the data at the public realm, not only the numbers of people that are being evicted but also and threatened by eviction, but also the reason why, the reason behind, which is there. Risk-prone areas, environmental protection areas, possession conflicts, slum upgrading, public-private partnerships, new infrastructure being implemented. So all of those are processes. Another thing is that we started, and everything that I have said up to now have to do with collective evictions, with communities, with so-called, and I hate this expression, informal, self-produced communities in our cities, which are quite big phenomenon. But also, there is also another data source that we are working with, which are through web scraping of São Paulo State Court of Justice in order to see evictions related to rent arrears with other processes which are more individual, which are more family-like. But also we do all the data mining with georeference, and then we produce some maps and some cartographies of, so this is one of the ways we represent cases by 1 kilometer radius. Each spot represents over 50 cases, so you can see the concentration of cases, the geography of dispossession, the cartography of dispossession. And then with that, we can see who and where are being affected, in this case, by the subway line construction, but also by urban renewal at downtown São Paulo, which is something that I will finish by showing a little bit more. And then we also, we promote gathering of the families affected, gathering of the communities affected, like this one in 2017, in order to discuss and think about collective action based on this information. And then putting more a focus on the downtown São Paulo, with this effort of cartography, the little spots with the cross being yellow or red are the evictions and threat of evictions. And then the perimeters that are drawn here are the different public projects, state or municipal projects that are being implemented in the case of the city center. And then we can see very clearly a concentration of projects which have as the main aim to erase the presence of low-income people in the city center in the name of revitalization of city center. And then is one of the examples, Campus Elíseos, which was called crackland because of concentration of drug abuse users in some areas, in some street. So this is a place where tenement house, this is a place where you have a lot of tenement houses in a very precarious conditions, and they were displaced, they are demolished, and a lot of police interventions were made at the same time in order to give ground to a public-private housing public-private partnership, which is there. And here, the means by which this displacement was done, including demolishing houses with the people inside and very, very harsh police intervention. And then what you see at the end, the construction of housing, none of the residents that used to live there in a very precarious condition had access to the new houses. So in the name of promoting social housing, we have a massive process of dispossession. And here is a map of where the people who are dispossessed, where they are now, at least some of them, listening and seeing, forming new precarious, irregular situations in a permanent situation of permanent transitority, as I call it, because this is the way it is. At the same time, we had at the planning level, because it's very important to see in different scales, at the planning level, a massive policy through rezoning of promoting so-called social housing in not only the city center, the little spot here inside, but also along the lines of the subway, saying, yes, we must densify around subway lines in order to get access to social housing where we have a good infrastructure. Wonderful idea, oriented, densification oriented through mobility, very famous. So what happened? There was a lot of incentives and subsidies to the real estate industry to promote social housing around those lines, those subway lines. But this is not social housing. This is fake social housing, basically. I know that in a lot of countries say affordable housing, and affordable housing has nothing to do with the needs of those who badly needs housing. And a very important part of what has been produced in this case and this condition was simply Airbnb, or built to be Airbnb, using all these subsidies. So I finish here just just to remind us, that is absolutely necessary to cross over the different lines and the different methods, mobilizing data, and it's very powerful. Cartography and the cartographic methodology is one of those very, very, very powerful methods that we can do in order to really show and to really demonstrate the political economy of urban transformation and who and how is affected by, in order for those subjects, for those who are affected, really become political subjects of this transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that brilliant presentation, Raquel. Mona, would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for including me in the UCL Urban Lab. It's wonderful to be there. It's wonderful. Thank you, Catalina and Abby, for organizing. I'm also super happy to be with two amazing scholars and ladies, and to be able to talk about the Urban Lab and this work, which for me is actually a way of, I guess, being able to continue to move on in what Catalina has maybe called turbulent times, but I think are in many ways way more catastrophic than we ever imagined. There will be times that we will live. And I think moments in which, as urbanists, we are really challenged to show our relevance. As researchers, to think that the tools of intellectual inquiry and however way we intersect them with mapping, with visualizations, with new modes of communication that are incredibly, and I concur with Raquel, very powerful, but still at the same time falling short of being able to stand up for the kind of challenges that we face. I speak in a region, those of you know Beirut and Lebanon, that is fully devastated by now by the last 2 years of war, but really 70 years of recurrent, incessant violence, not the least of which was the war that Israel started 3 days ago, but also with Iran, but also the genocide that is unfolding less than 50 kilometers from us. So what I want to show is, what I want to talk to you guys about is a little bit of what we've been doing in the lab and trying to reclaim the significance, very much starting with themes that are in parallel with what Raquel has done. And I've deliberately chosen to speak about issues of housing because I have been a very long-term fan of Raquel's work on housing. And I thought that the parallel between the two labs will actually provide a nice entry. And then maybe make a short segue to talk also about other ways in which our tools can take us when we feel unable to be silent in the face of the kind of violent realities that we're enduring. So for those of you who don't know, I work from an urban lab that's called the Beirut Urban Lab. So we're based in a private university, the American University of Beirut. And my lab is really shared work with a number of colleagues. I have 4 fantastic colleagues, faculty members, with whom I've worked for over 20 years. And about 8-9 years ago, we started together shaping a space that has become known now as the Beirut Urban Lab. We work with master's students, with full-time researchers that are very often our graduates from the master's program in urban planning and urban policy. And as the planner, if you want, in the team, for me, from the beginning, the idea was that to be able to design a lab was an idea to be able to produce research that can engage with the public-facing position of the university. When we're trained as planners, we think about ourselves as being as intervening in the name of the public good. And that notion of public, which is sort of embedded in everything we do, has been eroding almost everywhere around the world, but perhaps in Lebanon a little bit more than everywhere else. So when we began to think about how do we design projects that are public-facing, we were faced by 2 sizable challenges. On the one hand, public can mean the state, but what is a state when your main institution has been eroding year after year, when your spaces are privatizing, but also your state does not even claim anymore to be the custodian of the common good, and other actors have become way more powerful than the state. We in Lebanon live sometimes for a couple of years without a president, without a government, and somehow life goes on. But as planners trained to think that the custodian of the common good stands in the face of the state, in the name of the state, it is a very difficult exercise to approach planning. The other dimension of planning is, of course, the communities. And that, again, is very challenging because we live in a country that has endured a civil war, where there are a lot of divides, and where in many cases people don't want to live with each other. We also have received a very large number of refugees from the region surrounding us, Palestinians first and more recently Syrian. And about 1 in 4 persons in Lebanon today is a refugee. With the rise of right-wing populism, you are seeing it everywhere in the US, in Europe, but also here. Refugees are criminalized, they become scapegoated as the problem, and in very short, the public is made of communities that actually really don't want to live with each other. And I'll add to you one more riddle that I think is very relevant, and it's the way in which truth has become sort of an opinion in this populist moment. And when I say truth becomes an opinion, for us as scientists, as researchers, it becomes very challenging because we are trained to think that we produce ideas and that those ideas are then taken on by decision makers who implement them. And when then your truth becomes something which is a matter of opinion, you are faced with needing to find a new theory of change. And that has been sort of what we've committed ourselves to do, to think about how, in the context where we are, from our position as a research lab, we can position ourselves in an ecosystem of change, which means we have to look locally in the country, at the scale of the city and inside neighborhoods, but also regionally and globally for partners with whom we can think, produce new frameworks of thinking and explaining and theorizing, because that's what we do best as scholars, but also being convincing and testing those ideas in reality on the ground with communities and with other actors. And one of the things that became evident is that in this post-truth hypercritical moment, you need to create incentives for people to assemble, for people to say, okay, there is a collective and we can stand by it. And for us, and there's one of the intersections with what Raquel just presented, data became a fantastic entry point. In our city, data is a matter of, not only is it a matter of opinion, but I would argue there's been a systematic effort to unmap, to erase, to make things unclear. And then activists' claims are undermined because you tell them there are so many evictions and they say, oh no, you're just looking at a few cases, nobody know. You say the bankers and the politicians are benefiting from real estate speculation and you hear, yeah, but where are your figures? So we thought, let's curate a data set that represents the city accurately, that provides data that's free, but let's respond only to questions that are raised first and foremost by activists who are trying to make a difference, so that we really are within that ecosystem of change. And we started with the Beirut built environment data set. Some of you may have seen it before. It sounds really probably extremely basic for someone living in London. Like, really? You guys did a base map? There was no accurate georeferenced base map of Beirut. By producing this map in collaboration with other actors, including some small-scale heroes in public sector agencies, but also researchers, agencies, we were able to begin to create alliances with particular individuals in the public sector who have some data they could give us. And slowly, we mapped Beirut, and we began to produce data and information about who's building, what are they building, how are they building. And gradually, we began to add more attributes on the use of energy, on water, on vacancy, on the price of land. And this is done by direct fieldwork, one little project after the other. But those maps then also incentivize collaboration because PhD students can come and we support them. And then this data becomes also publicly available. Everything we produce basically is publicly available, downloadable, and can be used. But we also really want to partner with others to produce this knowledge. We try to push forward this knowledge to go beyond giving the data to create narratives about what is happening in the city. And some of those, as the one you see here, are about the way in which new buildings are segmenting the housing market and furthering divisions. So by mapping where and how high-end buildings are developed, as in red in this case, you can see how Beirut's seafront has been turned from a public area that people used to walk on into a multi-million-dollar view for those overlooking the sea and no benefit to the collective. We mapped vacancy, and by mapping vacancies in new buildings, we were able to show that there is no more need to build. We have to stop encouraging building because it's all speculative, because vacancy rates are extremely high. They're above 50% in the top areas. And then we're also able to build from these narratives proposals. We also mapped who are the developers. This is one of my favorite still unfolding projects. We digged into social media, one developer after the other, seeing who they work with, who they take pictures with. And through this mapping and connections, we're trying to build sort of an anatomy of the building machine in Beirut, but also who influences the decisions that encourage and who profits from them. And it came at no surprise when the financial meltdown happened in Lebanon, and we've had back in 2020, and it's still unfolding, what the World Bank has described one of the 3 worst financial meltdowns in the last 100 years, still unaddressed, we're able to show the central role that the built environment has played in the national bankruptcy. This is still unfolding. Because we said the state is not a custodian of the common good, the second challenge is to really go beyond just talking to the state and imagining ways in which you can build commons, data as commons again, but where it can be peer-to-peer and can make a change without having to make an advocacy claim. And for me, this project, which is experimental, has been going on for a couple of years and still needs a lot of work. The City of Tenants is such an example. The City of Tenants is an online platform. It is designed for tenants with data coming from tenants. Users are invited to enter their data, say what they're renting, where they're renting, how much they're paying, what conditions, what kind of contracts they have. And then the data set becomes available for someone looking for a house. And in a market that's extremely opaque, where I and other researchers had documented how difficult it is to be able to negotiate for a tenant when you have no idea what you should be paying. This kind of data then becomes a way to empower, to feel like you're part of a collective of tenants and to empower each other in the process. We're now in the process of inviting activists, tenant groups, to try and work with them to redesign this platform to become more user-friendly, but also to see whether we can get them to together become the coalition that is the custodian of this data set. And that's what I mean when I say we work with activists and we try to sort of use this commons to build more partnerships. Could go on forever about how this can also, in terms of findings, inform housing support. We found out that energy for low-income people is way more expensive than housing rent. And so it becomes really important that the housing subsidies that are disappearing because they're paid to slumlords become instead ways for which people can shift to solar energy or more affordable means that take them out of their dependency on private provision. Again, there is no public provision of electricity, or almost none, in Lebanon for the last decade. Did the same about precarious housing, and very much, again, similar to what Raquel has described on public projects and how they displace people and force them into precarious conditions. I will skip that to bring you a little bit more to the context of violence that we live, because in addition to the power of a financialized capital that has really devastated our city, we also have to contend with the fact that we've faced multiple violent episodes, not the least of which was the Beirut port blast back in 2020. This was the largest non-nuclear explosion to ever happen. And 1/3 of Beirut was devastated from the explosion. The government was considered by city dwellers to be directly responsible, and no one wanted them to come and intervene. But that also meant that there was no coordination for the repair work, that people were left alone to know, can I go back and sleep in this house or not? Is it safe or not? So we partnered again with other groups who did good visualizations, but also with public agencies to, not public agencies, with the Syndicate of Architects and Engineers that had many volunteer engineers. So we could map the different damages and help people find out whether they could fix their house or not, which needed structural support. The university also put a crisis unit to respond to phone calls and support people. And we produced, again, an online platform that provides multiple entry points for people to either know where is repair happening or who's repairing and how. These are some of the damage mapping. This is one of my favorite maps. I'll talk about it a little bit. For the 2nd year anniversary after the explosion, we decided to map who had not picked up the glass from where their explosion had happened, right? 2 years after. And the findings were very interesting. because what we found out is that low-income people had immediately picked up the glass. Some of them slept near the glass on the night of the blast because they had nowhere else to go. While in upper-income neighborhoods, like in Beirut downtown that you see here, it took much longer for the repairs to come in because they had other options, because they could leave, because they were waiting for the insurance. And all of this basically meant that they could delay things. I'm going to skip all of this coordination between NGOs, public space, urban recovery, to talk about how we then translate all this data also in projects that we initiate. So here, this is my colleague Huwaida, working with directly with one of the communities on redesigning the shared public spaces so that a public upgrade can happen, because much of the repair, when it's done by NGOs, neglects public space and only works on repairing individual homes. We also trained residents into citizen scientist methods and lobbied public decision makers to change projects. We put forward projects for the Port Blast, but also for the city coast, that then empower activists to have an exact claim. This is the plan we want for the city coast. It needs to be public and open for everyone. And so we get volunteer professional designers to come and work with us so that we can produce these projects. And we then hold them accountable also, because they become the collective of the planners in the city who have endorsed this proposal. And it becomes shameful for any architect to actually build a development project on the coast, because the collective of 200 architects and planners in the city have said that this is a bad idea. Or again, to turn a highway into a public space. And this is something we're still working on, to turn it into a large green infrastructure in one of the city's neighborhoods. We've also lobbied for changes in policy. I'll skip all of this because I only have 2 minutes left, and I promised to conclude on our regional circumstances. So as I mentioned, in the last 3 years, we have been exposed to I have lost all notions of time. You'll excuse me. Since October 7, 2003, we have really endured heightened violence in Beirut and in Lebanon and in the region, of course, in Palestine, as most of you know. And on October 8, as the bombs began to rain on South Lebanon, but also on Gaza, the students were completely alarmed. And 3-4 days into the war, they came and said, you hold us accountable to the highest ethical standards when we are going to talk to a low-income individual on the street, or if we're going to interview a woman. And then there's a big war. Where are your ethical standards? How do we position ourselves as researchers? What's our place in all of that? And so we began to think about ways in which we could engage. For me, just consuming the news, and this is what tends to happen to us. We spend a lot of time trying to understand, is the bomb going to fall on me? Has the war expanded? What's going to happen? Let's try to produce a narrative about the war using our tools of planning. So what you're seeing here is one of the experiments. It's that basically researchers went about looking for reliable data sets about where the war, where the exchange of fire between Lebanon and Israel was happening. And one of them was able to code, and then we visualized the extent of the data, analyzing it in terms of how far it goes, how deep it is, and how many there are. And every week we issued as we could find data. And this is really what I mean when I say fact versus opinion. It is not an opinion based on data that's collected and verified 3 times, that the bombing that Israel was doing is deeper, and you can see it by the white lines, larger and more destructive than the one that's coming out of Lebanon into Israel. It's also fully correct that that there was fire from Lebanon into Israel. And these create important, or North Palestine, these create important narratives for everyone to think about what is happening. But most importantly, as the news was constantly being forgetting about South Lebanon, not mentioning the level of devastation, these visualizations are able to provide a very accurate representation of the exchange. We've gone, you can see it here more powerfully, actually. We've also mapped shelter centers across the country to help those who want to support refugees. We had overnight, about a quarter of the Lebanese population had to move homes. And so we allowed people to find where there were shelters near their homes if they wanted to go and provide aid. I'm running out of time. We mapped where the bombs fell in South Beirut and their proximity to hospitals and schools. Again, it is not an opinion that the bombs fell less than 20 meters from a hospital or sometimes on a hospital. It's also not an opinion that this is international law and it's a violation of international law when Israel shells hospitals. It is an opinion if you think Israel has the right to do it or not, and I'll accept that if your opinion is this. But we cannot accept in this post-truth to put to the realm of opinion the realities that people are enduring when hospitals are being destroyed, schools are being destroyed. So these maps then use our capability as planners to visualize powerfully what is happening. And they've been taken over by the press everywhere. This is the city of Sur, Baalbek. And I'll conclude with this last project, which was about mapping where people came, because we also internally experienced very difficult moments during the war as the population of Beirut doubled overnight. And then the displaced families lived with other families, but they also occupied buildings. There was a lot of tensions because the Israeli army was shelling wherever the displaced populations were coming. So people wanted to live wanted to host other families, but they were also afraid that by hosting someone, they may end up receiving bombs. So we work to intersect displacement with financialization, show how the high rates of vacancy and the displacement intersect to still leave people out in these moments of war, to create an internal conversation, but also really to highlight the incredible solidarity that we witnessed on the street, with restaurants opening up and cooking for each other. This echoes Catalina's work during COVID, with families really opening their houses, etc., so that we don't end on a bleak picture. Now I'll stop sharing now because it's a lot. I'm sorry I went over time, but I'll just conclude by saying that to me, the fact that I am part of a collective of researchers, that we think together, that we are trying to produce a different reality is the only way to cope with the kind of realities that we are living in. Since this morning, there's been a drone buzzing over my window because the Israeli army has gone back to its heightened surveillance over Beirut. And so we have to live with the constant reminder that there is violence that is affecting and changing and transforming your life, and you may be threatened by tons of things. So having that collective of researchers first, thinking with them, working with them, and producing counter narratives has been incredibly empowering. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mona. This is like really, really inspiring and also heartbreaking. And I cannot say enough in terms of, the admiration of all the work that you've been doing in the midst of the most bleak times and, violent times. I have few things came up very strongly across both of your presentations. On the one hand, for sure, how you've been addressing spatial violence in different shapes and forms. I like, undergone by different actors, but also the different questions around how to create narratives and how data and the power of maps and visualization tools to actually use to assemble different kind of creating a critical mass to mobilize collective action in different forms. But I was wondering in terms of, how has been the experience in itself of working in the universities or considering urban labs as political actors that, are placing differently in these two different contexts. And I think it's very inspiring to see the connections, but how have you been enduring also the different threats that the universities and urban labs themselves are facing, both in terms of the funding, in terms of the ability or not to retain students, but also in terms of, as you rightly said, how to position the knowledge claims and the epistemic kind of authority that we still hopefully have, the authority over. So I would like just to hear from you some of the reactions and maybe what were the key points that you were taking from both presentations, and maybe move towards a more bright type of set of questions. Raquel, would you like to start?
Yes. Oh, no, thank you. Thank you, Mona, so much. Your work also inspires us and our lab and our collective of planners to do what we do. And we envy you the strength that you have in these very hectic times. In terms of the question that you raised is very important. No? If a lab, a university lab, is a political actor, how does it places in the political realm? Because we are talking about political realm. So very briefly, we have the privilege of being a lab in a 100% public university that belongs to the state of São Paulo, a university which is 100% free of charge for everybody. And what pays our salaries and the functioning is a tax. Part of the sales tax goes directly to the 3 public universities of São Paulo, the sales tax that goes to the state of São Paulo. So that places the university in a very autonomous place, because it does not depend specifically on the type of state government is in place, because the tax goes automatically to the university funds, and then the universities must manage this fund. This has assured the autonomy of the university in front of very, very difficult political situations that we had in the past and we still have in the present, with this very, very acute polarization that we have in Brazil, and especially the rise of the extreme right in Brazil. Fascism is everywhere. Fascism is in Brazil, is in the US, is in the Israeli government. We have fascists and extreme rightists running the world. And in our case, even if we don't have a national government today in Brazil in the hands of a fascist coalition, which was the case with Bolsonaro that we had before, even that, the extreme right has a very important and strong political base. So this conflict is there, but I think exactly because of the polarization, the university has a very, very important position on this conflict, because it still has some legitimacy in terms of knowledge production, in terms of not being completely embedded in the parties' discussion and conflict, but more with ideas. And we were fortunately enough to have the possibility of access to funds. But I can tell you that part of the funds that usually were funding types of urban labs like ours, because of the new US policy, but also in many different European countries cutting their own funds, now are also being cut in terms of funding. So there is a big, big, big challenge how to continue, because if you don't have at least, okay, we can do with volunteer work, but there is a limit on that. At least part of the team must be permanent and must be paid. A researcher must be paid, at least with good scholarships. So it's a big, big challenge, I would say.
Thank you, Raquel. What about you, Mona?
Yeah, I think the big challenge is really the truth. To be, we are in a private university. Our master students tend to be funded by the university, most of them by and large by scholarships, and we rely a lot on them for our work. But that's not enough, and it's not very sustainable for the university. So we do a lot of fundraising. We are always collecting funding for our projects, and this is a very big time and takes a lot of time, energy from us. So I can't present this as like this is the least romantic and the most time-consuming part of the work that we do. However, we have to be resourceful. In our context, one of the ways in which we get around it when we don't find funding is to try and find non-governmental organizations that are doing projects where we can help them reshape the projects that they're doing in exchange of some support or funding. So we play that hybrid card where we're partially consultants if we have to, and that helps us support ourselves when we're in very difficult times. But there's always the dream of securing an endowment somehow at some point, and just seeing the sustainability stay for the long time. And that's really been a conversation for us for a while, because you need to also give researchers not only a decent salary, but a sense that they can be there for a few years, that precarity in which they work from project to project is very difficult. Because we never really had a strong government, we never really were supported by the state. So that part did not disappear. I'll just say that in terms of influences on the university, on the one hand, we are incredibly privileged at the American University in Beirut because we're really the only people pretty much in the region that can say whatever they want, however they want. We have a relative unconditional freedom of speech in what we teach, what we do, and that is invaluable in the region where we are. On the other hand, we have a lot of pressures with whom we collaborate, and how, particularly coming from the American government with the Caesar Act, the restrictions on Syria, the restrictions on Iran. That means that a lot of conversations cannot happen within AUB because of US law and its application even at the American University. So you can see that this environment of what is freedom of speech, how do you create conversations that are constructive, is really way more complicated in our context. I guess the last thing I'll say about this is where I started, sort of, that maybe what lets us get around and be political players at some level is to think ourselves as part of an ecosystem of change. So as a lab, we are not a political actor. We cannot be a political actor, but we can feed and support political actors who are championing causes we believe in, and produce the reliable data and the solid narrative that can support them.
Thank you, Mona. I'm conscious of time, and there are a set of very interesting questions that are kind of connecting these points. But before we go into that, because I am very obsessed with pedagogy and what is the power we have, and that we are not only here to track violence, because that is kind of the urgent thing to do, but also to try to produce this sense of new realities and what is the space that we have in terms of our pedagogical approaches. So I just would like to touch upon briefly, before we go into the questions, on what is your relationship with pedagogy, and what is the connection that therefore it has with the local actors, with that ecology of activists that both of you mentioned, just to have a sense of what is the interface with the pedagogy and kind of the community action connection of your work. So I wonder if, Raquel, you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, no, this is a very important question, because one of the things is, especially talking about planning, planning language is 100% conformed and colonized by real estate. Period. Language of planning, the language itself, the epistemology itself is like that. So one of the big challenges is to translate something. If you take master plans, if you take urban regulations, if you take the initiatives, if you take public-private partnerships projects, they are made and launched in a language that has nothing to do with everyday language of needs, of what people feel and what people experience in their own lives. So here we have a double challenge, I think. One is decolonizing this language, because it's not by chance that this language is like that. It's not by chance. It's a very important tool of reaffirming a dominant hegemonic model of organizing and thinking space and cities, which is 100% subject with an idea that the best way of occupying a particular place is the one that provides more revenue to the invested capital of the place, basically. And this is the thinking that we are living today. So how we have a double challenge, because one is make transparent what is absolutely obscure, laws, plans, the language by the way, for everybody to really to translate. The other thing, but the other challenge, which is even more challenging, is to imagine other possibilities, because our imagination has been also colonized by this model. So it's very difficult to have a different imagination related to the same processes. So I think, and especially Mona started her talk by referring that these times are not only turbulent. It's like we feel like we really are in the end of the world, like something. It's really, and I remind again and again the words of Gramsci, saying that there is an old order that is absolutely gone, and we don't believe in this order again, which is our relation with nature, our democracies, the way we organize ourselves. And the new one is not born yet. And in this meantime, everything is very obscure and something very perverse emerge. So I think that when we do what we do as researchers, we are not formulating in a very old technocratic way a new model and promoting it, but as modernist thinking on planning has done so much, but we are opening the discussion for these new possibilities to emerge. And now since we have a lot of new imaginations, but they are very fragmented here and there, very particular. So to provide a network for the different ones to connect and be recognized, I think it's very important in order to create. And then the pedagogy is absolutely central to that.
Mona?
Wow, it's always hard to add to Raquel. I think you put your finger on the right place with translation and imagination. I guess there's two things I can say that are a little bit that can add a little bit. On the one hand, it's to think about the students that we encounter. As I said, I teach in a private university. Many of us are in this situation, and I feel that our students are extremely protected and our cities are very segregated. So it's they don't have the kind of experiences where they throw themselves in the city and they don't see the avenues. Where can they start in getting to know the city, in trying to imagine it. And so for me, a lot of the work that I do with undergraduate students is about working on actual research projects where we produce narratives from the city in conversation with city actors. And many of them then learn this work of translation that requires them to be able to understand other life words. Because they begin with their own bubble, and these kinds of translations become very important because they are taught as architects, and I'm in an architecture school, to do a site plan, and then the site plan is what are the buildings around you and what are the volumes around you. So translating instead the site plan to become the place where capital flows are coming, security is enforced, some forms of violence exist, what capital is playing a role, what other forces work, and how are they endured and lived by residents, become a very nice way of getting them to not only experience directly the city, but use that direct experiential knowledge as a strategy of learning. And I think that that's particularly important. You've also asked about how we engage other actors. I think it really depends on the actor. All the projects are designed with in mind this idea that we play one piece in a bigger part. So we're also learning how it works all the time. When we interact with the public sector actor who's willing to think about how land speculation in the last 30 years has transformed the city, we're also learning the prerogatives that he is, but he's getting to share with us an understanding of how this has actually affected the city beyond the small calculations that they're doing. And we do these in collective closed circle workshops. So you'd get a room with 20 people that has high-level public decision makers, activists who never want to talk to them, lawyers, developers. And then we say, let's agree on what was the impact of this land policy over the last 30 years. And then you have this big debate that helps them converge and see, and it really gives us a very different perspective on how things are shaped. So for me, these are maybe two things that I can add.
Great, thank you very much. There are a set of very interesting questions, but I'm going to try to connect them, and I can see kind of two or three cluster of questions. One from Apoena Manu and the one from Nisha Singh. They are asking around, the role. They are very thankful for both presentations. Everyone is very inspired by the presentations. And so Apoena says, if you believe that international dialogues such as this one between São Paulo and Beirut could help strengthen and scale up the political impact of urban labs, and if so, how might we enhance and expand these exchanges? And connected to that, Nisha says that she would like to have your thoughts around how displacement and conflict can catalyze coalition building between perhaps uncommon collaborators to push through reforms. For example, if arguably no resident, citizen, or displaced person is receiving public services the city should be providing, maybe this is a way for people to become aligned and gather the political capital necessary to get the reforms done. So I think that is one set of questions, and then maybe we can move to the other one.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Yes, we have today a very, also another challenge. We are doing a collection of challenges here, contemporary challenges, a question of scale, because some of the decisions and some of the processes that we map and try to understand locally, as Beirut map does for Lebanon and Beirut in particular, and we are doing for São Paulo and maybe for Brazil, Latin America, in our side, have to do with processes that are global. And especially when you talk about production of cities and production of infrastructure and management of infrastructure, we are talking about fluxes of international financial capital that are involved with, and there So they are not there. So when you talk about discussion and conflict over space, the urban warfare I was referring to, the actors involved on that, part of the actors are completely abstract, deterritorialized, and act in a very different scale, which is not even national. I mean, we don't even know who are them because they are scattered. Maybe our own little savings is part of the game, is also circulating in order to destroy something that we don't want to be destroyed. So I think it's very important. Having said that, why I say that? Because it's very important encounters and debates like that. And we have to try to go beyond and see how much those processes are connected and how much we can do collaborative work among ourselves in order to deepen the understanding of processes that are not embedded in our small scale, are not local. So I think it's very important, and it's also important for the second question, because we in order to phase and to organize and to connect the dots, it's very important to see them at the proper scale. This is one of the movements that we are doing now with presently with the Observatory of Evictions, with which we have the pleasure of having Apoena as one of the new researchers, because we are trying, because we build up our maps using the data that comes from affected people. But this is a very small part of everything that is going on, because it's self-declaratory. And who takes the time to declare, to organize? So the challenge, and how can we do that in a different scale? In a different scale that we can also mobilize everybody that is affected and don't even know that is affected by that.
Thank you, Raquel. Mona?
Yes, I think that this is one of the reasons why so many of us actually feel so disempowered, right? This global scale, the techno-capitalism, the scale at which things are unfolding, that makes the cities become the end recipients of forces that are way beyond them. And when you're in a small nation like Lebanon, the entire country becoming sort of a byproduct of too many geopolitical global forces, which leaves you at the local scale feeling that you're living a lot of the repercussions, but your capability of actually enacting change is very limited. I think this is where I really like urban politics and I like the city, because the city is ultimately a place that people have to think together about how they want to live together. And at the scale of the neighborhood, this is a very concrete story. So what we found working with communities and mobilizing even politically as individuals, not as lab members, is that when you tell people on a block that the problem of this very high level pollution is the generator that's in between the buildings, they all agree that they're dying from the same pollutant and that it's all in their face. And that begins to create a shared reality that can then translate into a shared aspiration. So I find that very local work in which you work with communities to think about how to make a square operate better, or to put forward a claim that they have control over, to be really powerful in bringing people together and in then enhancing the role of the city as a space of politics in the way we classically think of it, if you want. Now, at the same time, it's very important that we don't think of these issues as only emerging from our local context. And that sort of is the part that connects to this to the first question, which is why do we talk together? How do we talk together? It's really the fact that while we are all living repercussions at the local scale, there are many, not only similarities, but structural forces that are shaping and operating in all the cities similarly. And some of them are very basic. Just think about the power of property in the way it has colonized imagination and the impossibility of thinking of how to occupy space or have a safe home outside of property. And you begin to think about how similar actually the patterns are because of this grid that we imposed on our cities and in our imagination. And for me, thinking about these realities as a scholar with other scholars working in other contexts has been incredibly powerful in helping me understand, but also put forward claims for activist groups who, for example, are trying to resist privatization. You can't do this on your own. And you can do this, and this is your comparative advantage because you're a scholar, because you're in conversation with other contexts. So when you hear that in Canada, a group of activists actually reclaimed a private space on the grounds that they had used it for decades and that the owner cannot anymore close it off because they had invested their lives in it, you sort of can adapt that idea. And this is transfer of ideas and frameworks that I think is important. I could give tons of examples on thinking about the role of organized crime groups, for example, in Latin America, which is only relevant in Latin America. But actually, when you begin to think that your question is about these powerful actors who are not the state, who actually are imbricated in the organization of the public, there are so many frameworks you can bring that have helped us in Beirut understand how our spaces are governed. So I think we are in a unique position as scholars to actually do this work of translation across contexts. That's really important.
Thank you, Mona. There are two other questions that have a similar approach. And I think Tim Waterman, Jacqueline Aldalai are asking something that is connected. So Tim says, the marriage between far right and Silicon Valley means a looming threat to data, online presences, and digital work of all sorts. What ways are you seeking to protect your digital resources from an increasingly hostile tech sector? And connected to that, part of Jacqueline's question around how do you protect the lab's political and epistemic autonomy while still securing the resources needed to sustain long-term work, but also the risks of external actors shaping agenda, controlling data, or influencing knowledge production? Big questions, but I think the digital space seems to be one of the threats.
Can you repeat the first one, the first part, please?
The first one is the marriage between far right and Silicon Valley means a looming threat to data, online presences, and digital works of all sorts. What ways are you seeing to protect your digital resources from an increasingly hostile tech sector?
Yes, part of these turbulent times. Yeah, all the disinformation, malinformation, fake news that is being circulating with the very important support of the big techs. And as part of the new form of plus value extraction from our bodies and our work, because the new economy, with the platform economy that we are living, is exactly that. We work, we do everything, we engage in social media, and that is the main source of extracting value from our work, from everybody. Extracting value and concentrating in the hands of those who are destroying the planet, of who are destroying the lives in absurd wars and conflict, who are transforming the language of relationship only by the language of violence, and promoting violence as the main language by which social relations are being organized. So how can we, at the same time, disseminate information and counter information, and contradictorily, we have to do that through digital information to be there, but digital information which is controlled by another model, the model that are destroying us and killing us, just to start it, killing us in very different scales. Yeah, I don't have an answer for this question. Of course, I don't have an answer for this question, but I think that the idea, the very big idea, that finally the possibility to have access to information was something that should be democratized, which was something that we believed for many, many, many times, that universities were very elitist, centers of knowledge were very close to the mainstream population. So the idea that information can circulate much more widely was revolutionary and liberatory as a utopia, and then was taken over by capital and by finance, and it was turned into a different thing. So, but even taking into account, I think we still have to dispute information. And it's powerful. It's powerful in terms of, if at the same time we have a control of the big tech, but at the same time, as Mona referred to, we are not talking about opinion. We are talking about data. We are talking about something that happened. We have the picture. We have the recorded video. We have the exact location. We have documentation of what is done. And this is powerful at the same time. And in a way, we hacked through social media in order to bring a counter information, which is also important. But yeah, I don't have an answer for this very dystopian control of the big tech on information.
I think part of the question was also about whether our research eventually gets dictated by funding. And I think this is where one draws the line. You're never, I guess, rich as a researcher, as a faculty member, but you also have the privilege not to be dependent in your ideas to a large extent on the institutions. I think I want to think that we can do that to a large extent. And from that perspective, I think that what we've tried to do is to always start by asking research questions, or questions, I should say, that come out from our realities, that are urgent. And in doing this, we have been very lucky to actually have the lab be supported by funding agencies who believed in what we were trying to do. They are not local, they are mostly American, I should say, or international, Canadian, etc. But they have responded. They have found echo in what we're doing, because the questions we're raising are really within the context of the explosion of the port, the regional wars that basically respond to very urgent, very real needs, and where the work that we do, also the Syrian refugee crisis, I did not present any of the data on that, but definitely there's a lot of work there. All the work that we do then gets that echo from this perspective. And so far we've been, I should say, really lucky, and we've never bent our projects to please anyone. And as I said, I mean, this is the last privilege we have as thinkers, as scholars, so want to hang on to it. I think there was also something about data privacy and the protection of data. And that's, of course, everyone's nightmare. I'm glad that in the lab there are researchers who know a lot more about it than I do. So I know that I have to encrypt, and I know that we have to practice data hygiene. And we try to stay as informed as we can of the last threats that have come out and to be on top of them. We also try to be really lay and save everything on an external hard drive. And when there's an upsurge in violence, we try to have 2 external hard drives in 2 different locations. So we try to do these things because this is the best thing we actually can do. But they're not perfect answers, I know.
Thank you, Mona. We started getting a lot of questions, and I'm conscious of time. So I'm just going to read briefly some of them, and let's see if we can just wrap up perhaps with a general kind of answer to them. So Thea Maluf said, in highly systematically unstable environments, what extra measures do your labs take to contest state-driven narratives and censorship while safeguarding the credibility and safety of your institutions, especially during violent conflicts and war? Sunkana says, I have a question for Mona. She mentioned the reality of fractured and fragmented communities in Beirut that often do not want to live with each other. In what ways have the current wars in the region and the threat posed by Israeli military activities in Lebanon impacted these communities? In other words, has there been more solidarity in the face of these realities, or do these divisions remain? There's a couple of questions around public space and the future of public space in the current times. Kartik Gupta signals, from Tahrir Square to Sukoti Park and from Madrid to Santiago, recent urban protests and solidarity movement have evoked the belief in democratic practices and civic values that have been historically associated with cities and public spaces. In the context of your work in São Paulo and Beirut, how does public space design facilitate citizen right to a just city? What critical participatory approaches can be used to create inclusive public spaces that respond to diverse needs, desires, and aspirations of individuals and communities alike? And what are the futures of public space in the face of global pandemics such as COVID? I'm seeing the decline of public space, and that will facilitate citizen power in cities across my country in India. I'm curious to learn more about your insights specifically from public space. Then there's a more regional discussion there between Omar Al-Bolnaga and Jacqueline. Omar is, most of his research is in Cairo. So to what extent can the Beirut Urban Lab work closely with the growing number of urban lab counterparts in Arab cities, given that, as you have said, and as I can clearly see, the Beirut Urban Lab can be politically off limits in other cities in the region? And similarly, Jacqueline responds in that sense, as someone based in Jordan, can clearly see the limitations you are describing, and also co-founding activist urban research collective and constantly negotiating how to sustain critical work in contexts where even modest forms of urban advocacy can be politically sensitive or seen as confrontational. And well, we keep getting this. From your vast experience, what is the single most important thing you would recommend to empower local communities toward collective action in the face of questionable governance systems? And Suzanne, the work being carried out by both labs, truly commendable, especially in times of crisis. In your opinion, when cities are constantly in a state of transition, to what extent can data remain reliable for long-term research projects? So vast set of directions of questions, but perhaps because we have just a few minutes left, I wonder if Raquel kind of just try to give a wrap up of that, maybe can address some of those points, and then.
Yeah, of course, I'll take just 2 of the questions. One is on public space. Unfortunately, I don't have good news on that. I think that what's going on, it's more and more privatization of public space. And that goes, and this is very important to understand, not only from above, I would say state and corporation privatizing everything which is public in order to be private and in order to become a commodity and be paid. This is what's going on, at least I think globally, but also at the level of communities. And the old self-building way of doing communities and organizing space and appropriating space also being attacked from below in operations of privatization in order to implement in old public spaces like square and streets or sidewalks, extractive operations of providing housing to rent, providing spaces to sell, like very privatized and in an extractive nature in terms of we are not talking about survival, immediate needs of survival, but we are talking about making money off and providing money off, and also outlets for surplus capital, which circulates even in low income and popular territories. So I think we should address this issue in a very serious way, both from above and from below, because this is what is really changing our cities. And yes, I think cities are in a permanent state of transition. That's why it's so important to dispute this transition. And I think that urban labs like LabCidade were able, in not very many occasions, to stop projects, to change projects, to open space in projects in order to understand some of the things that should be considered. So I think that it's not just a case to document, to denounce, but it's a case to act through planning, to act through research. And I will finish that. Again, thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful conversation and opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all these questions. I'm listening to Raquel and looking at all these questions, and it's at the same time really exciting to see that there's so much interest in these questions, and also so many echoes and attempts at creating labs. So maybe I'll use my 2 minutes to say that we're often asked how we started and how it's possible to actually start an urban lab anywhere else. And I fully agree with the fact that we cannot, no lab will be able, or should anyway, be working on 20 cities. From what we've described as our position as researchers with a southern disposition, we started from the position that we work from a place with a place in relation to a place, but in conversation with others. And so for me, being able to help start a Amman urban lab, a Cairo urban lab, a Damascus, Homs urban lab, Aleppo urban lab is beyond a dream. And we definitely in the lab are all committed to helping do this. So an exchange of methods, experiences, joint workshops, collaborations to think about how to start, but also the second place to start is the local ecosystem that will let you sustain. So we can help and we can be part of a conversation that will help us also grow, but it's also important that there are researchers in your local context who have a shared similar interest, so that the research that is created or the base that is created, whether it's a map or a data set or a photographic archive or whatever you're doing, is something that can extend beyond an individual project or a need to serve as an infrastructure for future collaborations and be open-ended. That's what I described as a data commons when I started my presentation. And for me, perhaps this is the most important piece for work to live, that it lives as a commons, because then there will be other actors who want to be part of it. That's that I guess in a nutshell is what I can say. And again, thank from all my heart everyone who has attended all the questions. Raquel, can I close by saying that I saw Raquel in 1996, just as I was starting my master's degree at MIT, and I said, God, I want to be like her. And so I continue to be inspired by your incredible work and your lab, and Catalina too, always. Thank you for the invite and for everything else you do.
Well, it's, when I was presenting next to you in Santiago, I said also to Mona, when I grow up, I want to be like you. So I think this is a beautiful, ecosystem of urban researchers. So thank you very much both for agreeing and staying with us. Having this power conversation, I think, is very inspiring, but particularly, I leave with a very important key point. We have perhaps the most important crisis is a crisis of imagination. And if we may, we just start there. And I think the power of pedagogy, the power of getting together, of activating the networks of hopefully urban labs across the globe, and this group of kind of like-minded people, I think is more important than ever, that we remain strong and together and try to find ways to keep these conversations going, because sometimes we feel so isolated in some of the spaces that we inhabit institutionally. So I see this also as a gesture of solidarity across places and across colleagues that are doing such an important work in this kind of very complicated, catastrophic time. So thank you, both of you, everyone that joined us. We had a massive interest in this event, so hopefully we keep the conversation going and we will figure something out to keep this conversation. We have to produce an alternative reality, and this is here. We are offering spaces for doing that. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you soon. Our event that is following up is going to be on July 22nd. We will be discussing doing otherwise, tracing feminist urban methodologies to try to think and trace, right, how we actually work from the infrastructures of life. What are those life-affirming infrastructures, and how can we go about it as another source of hope and strength in these difficult times? Thank you very much, everyone, and we will be circulating the recording with everyone. Thank you very much. Bye.